You're listening to the Paul Young Podcast.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Paul Young Podcast. This is a potpourri day. That is, thoughts about a number of different things that I've encountered in the last little while. Thoughts about, people's comments about some things that I've said that I probably need a little more clarification. I've been thinking about something, and I've said this quite a bit, and I know a lot of you have heard it, and I would say things like, there's a real difference between an apology and asking for forgiveness. And I don't mean to nullify apology, but apologies, just saying I'm sorry, are for, misdemeanors versus felonies. Relational misdemeanors versus relational felonies. Accidents, simple things. It's totally okay to say, oops, I'm sorry, or I'm sorry that happened. I'm sorry that I wasn't paying attention. All the normal everyday stuff. But when it comes to that which fractures relationship or potentially fractures relationship, is very hard on relationship, something that is of major consequence where harm is involved, it's time to change the balance of power, because apologies don't really impact the power relationship between two people. It's just more of an announcement. I recognize I did something wrong and I'm sorry. That's what an apology is. And it doesn't require a response from the other person. Asking for forgiveness does. And when it comes to harmful actions, harmful words, the power is in the person who's done the harming. And the asking of forgiveness is to exchange the power. It's to give the power back to the one who's been harmed or the one who's been a victim in the situation. So if I've done something harmful and I just go, well, I'm sorry, that's way too easy because I'm just making an announcement and you're supposed to be okay with it. Asking for forgiveness invites you into the conversation and then relinquishes the power to you. Now you have a say. You have a choice. You can ask whatever question you want to ask, like, what are you sorry about? Or what are you sorry for? Or why did you think that was okay? Or the response may be, I'm not ready. I'm not ready to forgive you. I'm sorry. But I'm still working through the backwash of your actions and what's happened. And you can see how much more difficult asking for forgiveness is inside of a relationship than just announcing, well, I'm sorry. I'm sorry doesn't relinquish power at all. The piece I wanted to make more clear was that apologies have a place, simple everyday stuff. But when it comes to situations of harm or potential breaking or estrangement inside relationships, then part of the healing process is to ask for forgiveness and being ready to deal with whatever the consequences of that might be. It is submission and humbling. It's hard to ask for forgiveness. It's so much easier to just apologize and go on your way thinking that fixed things. But when there's been harm, it doesn't. I did an episode recently called, I don't know what it was called, but Don't Be Friends with the World was sort of the theme. It was kind of a rant, actually. I, again, want to make it clear that this is not a call for separation, that is, leaving the world system. It's just don't be a friend of the world system. Don't treat it like an ally. When we're talking about the world system, we're talking about the way that people use people or where people are objectified. That's how the world system works. We are definitely to be friends with human beings. And then it doesn't matter where they come from, what their background is, how they're thinking, where they're stuck, what they've done that harms, what their history is. Our movement is toward befriending. And you see that, and I quoted this last time, Jesus was a friend of sinners, and I are one of those. And I am so glad that he continued to reach out to me over and over and over and over, and just didn't nullify me, just didn't categorize me and put me in a box and say, well, he's too broken. There's nothing we can do to fix him or repair him. It's not a phrase, it's not an idea, which I grew up with, don't be a friend to unbelievers, or don't be a friend to those people of that denomination, because they're very strange. Whatever it was, that's the way of the world. That's annihilating relationship for the sake of being right. All right. It's been an interesting last 60 days. Within the span of the last 60 days, I've had 3 friends die. Very different situations, very different frames of reference, contexts. One of them died from death row. He was executed. Another one, an elderly woman in Alaska, succumbed to cancer. And very common person, very extraordinary in her ordinariness. Fighter, feisty, funny. And both of these I know because of the shack. And so that's true for the third one as well. It was through initially the shack and then building relationships that then passed this person on to me through those relationships. And he died on Father's Day, not long ago. I was able to be at the third one's memorial service or celebration of life, but not the other two. Of course, when someone's executed on death row, they're alone except for a spiritual advisor and those who are administering the drugs. And they do have last words, and he did. He made a lament and really asked the governor for maybe that there would be mercy enough to look at the cases and think about this hard and long, this whole issue of the killing of human beings. Beautiful man in the sense that, yeah, it looks like he committed those crimes. I mean, that's what part of the evidence suggests. There is a bunch of evidence, and he said he never did. And the whole, I don't know, how long was he in death row? 20-some, maybe early 30 years. He's the one that made me my little Bible cover and sent it to me, I don't know, 2 weeks before he was executed. He was a worker with leather and had taught a lot of the guys on death row how to do leather work and other arts and crafts. Oscar. And then Care lived far enough away that I was not able to get there. When I think about these 3 situations, they're so different in terms of their history and background. Oscar and my friend, who I will call I'll call him Adam, who passed on Father's Day. Oscar and Adam came from polar opposite sides of the world. That is, in terms of their relationships and their families and their history. Oscar very tragically abused and growing up in a very difficult world. Adam not so much. Adam being an incredibly brilliant person when it came to business and all of those kinds of things. And I went to the memorial service because it was held near where I live, so it was easily accessible for Adam. I'll tell you about that in just a second. But when I think about Care, I think about her being absolutely surrounded by family and friends. And there would be no notoriety for her, although for us who know her, there was some notoriety. Like I said, she was quite a character, a wonderful human being, a fighter. She fought a number of different physical maladies, and she fought hard. I'd call her up and say, "Are you dead yet?" and she was almost dying a lot, but man, was she stubborn and loved life, really loved life. So I think of her as being surrounded by a small company of family and friends and being celebrated for the relationality of her life. And Oscar, I know that he was surrounded during his whole ordeal leading up to his execution. I think this was the 4th time he was almost executed, but this time they followed through. And the other times they stopped it for one reason or another. I think the last one before this was because they found out that the drug protocols they were using were 5 years past their use-by date, which, if you think about it, is sort of horrendous. And so he had to stay on his execution. But he was so well loved, and not just by the death row inmates, but by those who watched over him, guarded him. They cared for him. And so he had friends in the system. He didn't live a life of notoriety in any kind of positive sense. Care didn't either, but Adam did. And it was so interesting to go to a memorial service in which the life of someone who had a significant impact in the lives of other people was celebrated. And yet there was this undertone of sadness. So, for 2 hours, I was the last person to speak, and I was one of the 3 that had been asked specifically to speak. And I was there on behalf of my friend who had introduced Adam to me because he couldn't be there. He had engagements somewhere else in the world. And so I was speaking on his behalf. I was reading what he had written. And for 2 hours, we heard major voices, CEOs of companies and heads of university departments and athletic teams and organizations and people that Adam had touched in many different ways and deeply and beautifully touched. And yet a number of folks would turn to the family and say, thank you. Thank you for giving us Adam so that he would have the kind of impact in our life. And I knew it was like a two-edged sword. That, yeah, that was true, but it cost the family. And that family and the losses within it because their father had not been accessible and not been easily connected to. And so the stories that they told were funny and touching and beautiful, but there was the edge to it. It reminds me, some of you know Donna and Jamie Winship, good friends. And Jamie spoke one time and talked about how he had about, 45 CEOs, CFOs, major corporate leaders in a room. And he was speaking to them and he said, we're going to start with an exercise and we're going to go around the room. And there were 45 of them. So for the next 45 minutes, each person gets 1 minute to tell us who they are. The first person said, well, I'm the CEO of a company that did $2 billion worth of business last year. And Jamie said later, I watched him divide that room. Suddenly, that $2 billion became the marker against which everybody would measure themselves and define who they were. So the second person said, well, I'm not part of a company that did $2 billion, but we did, and he would say, I'm the CFO and all that. And it goes around the room. And at the end of it, Jamie said he wanted to stop it like partway through and throw up his hands and go like, what the crap? But he felt the Holy Spirit saying, no, just let it go. They get all the way around the room and Jamie said, we've spent 45 minutes and I know nothing about you as a person, nothing. So we're going to do this again. And this time, I want you to answer this question. What is the hardest thing you're dealing with in your life right now? And the $2 billion guy burst into tears. And he said, the hardest thing I'm dealing with in my life right now is that my children won't talk to me. And Jamie says, suddenly that room united. They united around loss. They were separated by platform and notoriety and success. And I'm thinking, when we celebrate someone's life, what would they want us to talk about? Their successes, their notoriety? No, I know Adam. He would have wanted to talk about some of his losses and some of his failures and what it cost his kids and the sense of separation that he felt and the need for healing that needed to be there. Yeah, 3 lives, all in a sense well-lived. You could argue that Oscar's youth was not well-lived, and you'd be right, but he ended well. Care ended well, and so did Adam. And when I got up to talk, I said, I didn't know anything about, and there were tables full of regalia and success plaques and photos with famous people. And I said, I had an advantage. I didn't know any of that until after he died. I just knew Adam. I knew him as the tender-hearted, as the seeker of God, trying to find a way toward the light. The piece that I read from my friend who couldn't be there talked about the same things. And I looked at one point, and for 2 hours, the son of Adam had kept a stoic face, but now was in a wreck. He was weeping because someone talked about his dad. And in that reference, referred to the hardness of that history and that relationship and the estrangement of it. And you could feel that in that moment, the possibility of some healing was there. There was one man who was at that celebration who, in the open mic time, the 2 hours, he spoke. He talked about how he had been a performer coached by Adam. And he said, afterwards his life fell apart. He got involved in drugs and he ended up in some prison time and really addicted. And he was pulling his way out. And a lot of it he gave credit to Adam and what Adam had told him. And when I talked about Adam and read what my friend had sent along with me. He began to weep, not just, muffled crying, but loud cries of the heart. And afterwards, as I walked away from the microphone, he comes up and he just wraps his arms around me. And I felt, all right, here's the real person in the room. Here's the one. And our unity is around our losses. It's not about the successes of our lives. It's about the redemption that's inside the hurt, and the hurt that's inside a lot of our relationships. So why don't we start to live today in a way that when the celebration of life happens for us, it will be like cares or like Oscars. There will be a sweetness to relationships and a life that evidences not just the loss, but the beauty of redemption.